clause every year. Okay, I got it. And they give you just two choices. You got to say, I got it, or you can leave the meeting. So I wasn't sure which one to take, but I'm in category 1B, as Pam said, so I decided to take my chances. Last week was more about personal issues, if you will, and how we can be better people. This week is more about historical issues or leadership issues or biblical issues, or however you want to phrase it. And I was talking with Bonnie about this at some point. So the question is, how do you follow up from a leader like Moses? Now, Moses wasn't always so popular, but he took the hard decisions and he was very dominant. And this was in the old days when somebody could get away with that. Like today, I don't think that Moses would be able to be so dominant, right? That they would accuse him immediately of being autocratic, and he might be in big trouble. Bernie.
Where were you the last 4 years?
Well, all right. I don't know if I'm allowed to respond.
You're not.
Oh, score one for Bernie.
But I don't think it's the same thing. I mean, Moses really dominated the political landscape in a way that is unparalleled in modern experience. You know that, but now he's dying, or he's about to die. He doesn't really go through a process of dying, which is interesting as well. He just kind of dies, and that too is of significance. But he's going to die very shortly, and the successor to him is someone who's been around for a while, and it was known who's going to succeed him, and that is Joshua. And Joshua seems to have a very different skill set, and whether he's successful or not, I'm not sure, but he's going to focus on very different things. So that's kind of the opening. I'm trying to just set the scene a little bit. Any other comments of things that would be opening kinds of comments? Pam.
Rabbi, why do you think that Moses asked God who should be the successor instead of Moses telling God who should be the successor?
Well, okay, that's an interesting point. So Moses asked God. So is that a political thing? Like I want this guy, but I don't want to say it because that would seem to be a little presumptuous. And so I'll ask God, and I'll hope that God, already knows who I want. So do you think it's a little bit like that, Pam?
I think Moses has been kind of knocked down a few times by various things that God has said to him recently. And I think at this point, he's just turning it over and, washing his hands.
Well, yes and no. I mean, he gives all these speeches, so he's clearly concerned with his legacy. Babette and then Sai.
Well, maybe he didn't want to have Jewish guilt. Maybe he knew that his sons weren't as capable and didn't wanted God to make the decision so he couldn't get backlash.
So now, of course, he's going to die soon, so he can't be worried about long-term backlash. I guess, short-term backlash is also not good. Sai.
Obviously, for a long time, God has taken care of Israel. He's taken care of them in Egypt, and he took care of them in the desert. And now he's passing the mantle on to whoever Moses picks. But is he really doing that? Does he really want someone else running the show as much as putting the Israelites on their own and having them run their own show rather than God taking care of them.
I guess that's an open question. Who was next? Who wanted to talk? Lorraine or Minya? Ray? Jennifer? Bernie? Riva? Anybody? Shirley? Okay, Bernie.
Yeah, it seems kind of strange that Moses has been this basically autocratic leader all along, and all of a sudden at the very end, when it really doesn't matter to him personally so much, he says, why don't you make the decision for me?
So it's more like acceptance of death and acceptance that it's really not his decision.
Yeah, I'm tired and I don't want to be bothered anymore.
Well, in a normal environment, at age 65 or 70 or 75, most would have retired, right? Move to Arizona, play a little golf, get involved in his local temple. I mean, but literally he's working in a very high stress job to 120 years old. I mean, even if you could do that, why, do you really want to? I mean, Ray, how old are you?
101.
So even if you have the energy, do you want to take over running, being the leader of the Israelites in the desert?
I think that he has always thought about the people in general. He was able to appoint many judges, and he comes to the epitome of his journey, and he knows he's about to die. Asking God whom he should choose is absolutely perfect, a political move, or from his heart. And he does worry about the people because he knows how many human craziness all of us have. And so he comes out and he pronounces that it is Judah. And I don't see that anybody stands up and starts to argue about it. It is a done deal. Did you hear me?
Yes, every word, Ray. Every word. Minya.
I don't know if he was so willing to just step down. I think there was a point, I thought I read this, that said he was hoping that he could be by Joshua's side for a while until there was a smooth transition. So I never thought that he really thought of himself as, oh, I'm so old, I can't do this anymore.
Right.
I think he knew that he needed to make this change and that there needed to be a change. But I don't think he was so willing to just step down.
Yes, and that's what, it's not a very American attitude. It's not. It's just, he would have kept going forever if he could have. Yes, Marcia, you have to unmute.
Are you muted?
I will be in a second.
I was trying to be good, keeping myself muted.
Yes.
Maybe he was he wanted that seal of approval from God. He could make the decision. This is a very big deal. Moses has been shopping them around for 40 years. We've got to move on to different leadership and different thoughts, etc. And I think maybe he didn't want to be, maybe he was having second thoughts about making that great decision himself.
Okay, Sai.
Well, Moses has been the mouthpiece of God for 40, 50, 60 years. And the writer, whoever is doing the writing at that particular time, for whatever reason, and that to me is the important thing, decided to take God out of the picture and put the Israelites on their own or give them a whole new leader. Now, why did he want to do that at that particular time? God, if Moses lived for 120, It would have been easy to have them live for 180 if they wanted to.
Yeah, but all good things have to come to an end at some point, right? So whether it's 120 or 180, it's going to end at some point. And the ending it would seem to be would be logically when they ready to enter the land of Israel, right? A new phase. Lorraine.
I think it's the ultimate act of resignation. I think he was deeply hurt that he couldn't and disappointed that he was not allowed to go into Israel. I think he was like kids when they're fighting and you finally separate them and the fight isn't really finished, but they give up and they go, whatever. I think that was that kind of attitude.
Oh, so he feels he's been defeated and that he's really not happy about this.
Correct.
But there's some things out of control, even of a Moses.
Absolutely.
So in political terms, he was very dominant, but in this case, there's God above him who far transcends that. Riva.
Yeah, going up a couple pages, it says that Moses really did a lot to prepare Joshua for the position. He was mentoring Joshua literally for years and preparing him. So although he wanted the approval of God to make that decision, I think in fact he had been making it for years. And so Joshua was really the logical choice. You know, when you start mentoring people, and I'm sure a lot of us have done mentoring over the years, you really know who can do the work and who can't, and you continue mentoring that, just as some of us mentor our children as well as people we've worked with.
And what do you do if you're mentoring somebody and you decide they're not really capable of doing it? Bernie.
Might this asking God to make the appointment be just simply that if God says it, that it's much less likely to be a revolt and complaint?
Well, that's true. Although the Israelites are a difficult group.
To this
Well,
day.
exactly. If they're
I mean, I'm not
difficult,
speaking from personal experiences.
Yeah, so that's where we get it from.
But it's not 100% that they would listen to God either.
but it's more likely.
More likely, all right. More likely, all right.
I think you answered an interesting question. I don't know if anybody else has a comment, and that is, what do you do if you're mentoring somebody and they're not what you hope they would be? They can't do it or won't do it or whatever. I
Right.
think, some of us have faced those over the years, and some of our children are kind of different from what we expected also. You do the very best you can, and then you try and make, a responsible decision on what's best for everyone.
Right, and I had a friend that he was a social psychologist, but he worked as a business consultant in small family businesses, not so small, but where his job was to help the elder generation prepare to hand over the business to their children. And this was very hard sometimes because you'd have an eldest child in some cases who really wasn't. There's just a lot of background noise. Steve, can you help me with this? Do you hear this?
Is coming from,
I hear it. Can't be me this time.
Thank you very much. It's just driving me nuts. Sometimes the eldest child who was naturally going to take over the business isn't really capable, or it lacks certain specific skills. So my friend went in there to either try to teach them the skills or to develop a consensus in the family how best to pass on the business once the parents retire or pass away or whatever's going to happen. And what you don't want to happen, you see in the news sometimes where the children then go and war at each other, and they hire lawyers and they basically destroy the asset by fighting with each other. And in most cases, he was successful. The weakest situation where was the parents were very weak, and they would not agree to make the hard decisions that might have been necessary, and they just left it to the 3 or 4 children to, essentially fight it out, which wasn't their intention, obviously. Steve.
Don't you also think that he chose Joshua because he had the military experience to take over the land?
And that was going to be a very important skill at exactly this time, because the Israelites had basically been avoiding battle, right? Because the joke why the Israelites wandered in the desert for 40 years. Okay, Riva knows it. It's because Moses, being a typical male, would not stop to ask directions. And it was before GPS. But the real reason was they didn't take the north. There was a brand new superhighway that had been built all along the ocean in the north part of Sinai, which was very direct and very beautiful and very quick. Now, it did have a toll road, and there was no McDonald's. But other than that, it was a great option. The only problem was that it was fortified. So because it was a real road, I don't know which tribes, but the Hittites, the Amorites, or the Jebusites, they had armies stationed there. So the only way the Israelites could go on that road was to fight those armies, or to go through with permission, which they didn't have. So that's the reason they went down into the Sinai, to the southeastern part of Sinai, because they were trying to avoid the major thoroughfares. So the Israelites were not really engaging in battle for these 40 years. They were just hanging out, presumably training for the future, presumably, but it seemed mostly they were just fighting. And God was mostly waiting for the older generation to die off. So they didn't really make too much progress. So now in this next generation, it's going to be a completely different story. Now, I'm going to say this with emphasis. I know Sai will understand what I'm saying. According to the Torah, the Israelites then invaded the land of Israel and conquered territory there, according to the Torah's account. And now I'm not going to go into detail what I mean by that, so I hope you understand. Okay, do you want to start reading on page 172? Bernie, are you a willing reader?
No, I'd rather not, because if I talk too much, I start coughing. We had a lot of smoke here from the California fires.
Yes, I spoke last week in Northern California on Zoom for a congregation just south of Palo Alto, I think. And they were saying that they were going to have some of the people come to the temple to watch me on the big screen, and some people at home on Zoom, and they canceled the big screen option because of all the smoke. So we're lucky here in Arizona, we only have drought and no smoke.
We have the drought too, but today's weather said, don't go outside and don't drive your car unless you have to.
Oh, wow.
Wow. And that's not coronavirus related, right? So.
You want to move back?
Well.
But it's under 90 degrees here for the high.
What is the temperature here? It is right now Oh, it is 97 degrees in the shade.
And here it's 77.
Wow, 20
We're
degrees.
we are having an air quality alert right now for ozone, right? Look it up.
Okay, who'd like to read? Okay, Riva, it is.
Okay, Moses passes on leadership to Joshua. On 2 occasions, the Torah speaks of Moses' retirement and of his responsibility to pass on his leadership to the next generation. In Parshat Pinchas, Moses is told he will not be allowed to enter the land of Israel, but like Aaron, will die in the wilderness because of his excessive anger in striking the rock and damning the people at the waters of Meribah Kadesh. Moses responds by asking God to appoint someone over the community who shall go out before them and come in before them, and who shall take them out and bring them in, so that Adonai's community may not be like sheep that have no shepherd. God answers Moses, single out Joshua, son of Nun, an inspired man, and lay your hand upon him. Moses then confirms the appointment publicly before the priests and the entire people. In Parshat Velech, Moses has reached the age of 120 years and is about to die. He calls Joshua, and in the sight of all Israel, transfers the powers of leadership to him. Moses tells him, be strong and resolute, for it is you who shall go with this people and into the land, and it is you who shall apportion it to them. Fear not and be not dismayed.
Okay, thank you. And this is from our week's Parsha, Deuteronomy chapter 31. So the first question is, Moses says, to God, pick a leader, because we don't want Adonai's community to be like sheep who have no shepherd. Do people really need a shepherd? Do people need a leader in general? Not talking about the children of Israel, just in general. Do people need a leader? Pam.
Yes. Otherwise, you get a lot of different opinions, and somebody has to put together all those opinions and come out with a plan.
Okay. So every group or organization, or most groups or organizations, need leaders.
I think so.
Okay, Minya, you agree with Pam?
Yes, I do. I feel that without someone stepping up and showing leadership, you're going to have chaos.
Because nobody can make any decisions. Now, I mentioned that today leadership has much greater limitations than it may have had in the ancient world, in some ways. In other ways, we have the ability to reach our followers more, right? So a leader today, for example, can send out an email blast. When President Biden wanted to address Jewish leaders, they sent email. So I, as a member of the Central Council of American Rabbis, I got an email saying next week, they didn't give us much notice, 2 or 3 days, I think. They said, or later this week, President Biden will be addressing rabbis of all the different denominations. If you're interested, register. So I click, I registered, and then a few days later, I went on. They said they weren't going to record it. So I recorded it myself. So the FBI didn't come to arrest me yet. And President Biden got on to the Zoom or whatever it was. And he talked to us for about 20 minutes. It was very easy. So in some ways, now, if this was in the old days, we would have to fly to Washington, D.C., right? And I remember years and years ago, I went to a seminar sponsored by the Religious Action Center in Washington, D.C., and we went to meet then Vice President Gore. And we had to go fly to Washington. We had to go to the Capitol building, or whichever building it was. And, you know, it was much more trouble, you know. So, and we still didn't get a picture with him. You know, he only took a picture with the big shot. So it didn't, you know, we came out very dissatisfied. And he spoke to us for an hour about environmental policy. And we were like, when are we going to get a picture? But in general, people today are much less inclined to accept somebody just because they say I'm the boss. You know, that you know, people are much quicker to question their authority and to say, you know, you've been boss for too long, it's time for a new. There's a very rebellious spirit today, I think, or a very questioning spirit, or a very skeptical spirit. I'm not sure what it is, but it makes it harder to exhibit leadership. Comments or questions just in general about leadership before we get into this particular situation? I think it's just worth thinking about the concept a little bit first. Riva?
Just one thought. I certainly see this. We certainly see this internationally in other parts of the world that are quite chaotic, where leadership is very severe or almost non-existent, or, you know, just highly competed. I mean, Afghanistan is a perfect example of that right now, or an imperfect example, I suppose.
And Lebanon.
And Lebanon, and parts of South America, Venezuela, for example.
Yeah, and so in Venezuela versus Lebanon are not exactly the same, in that Venezuela, you technically have a central leader who's been there for quite a while, Maduro, who has Jewish ancestry, by the way, that he's very proud of. We're not so proud of him, but and Maduro runs the country, but it's run down to such an extent that there's not a lot. The central government is mostly worried about keeping themselves around. They can't actually effectively run the country. In Lebanon, central leaders such as they were, there was a couple assassinated, a couple just discredited and thrown out. And so you've got, it's just factions, and the factions don't want to work with each other. Everybody's trying to divide up what there is left. And as a result, the pie keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And the average person is being driven to desperation. So you can see that with poor central leadership comes a suffering for the people sometimes. Now that's, running a government is very different than a supper club or something. If you have 6 or 8 friends and you want to go out to dinner, do you still need a leader?
Makes the decision about where to go and what time to leave.
Well, how many we have right now here? We've got 19 on the Zoom, no, 14 on the Zoom. So the 14 of us wanted to meet for dinner tonight. Could somebody randomly pick a restaurant that would be broadly acceptable, or would we get into an extended, somebody will say, no, I can't go there, that I don't eat red meat. And then somebody else will say, no, that's too far from my house. And that's somebody, a third person will say they don't have outdoor seating. And a fourth person will say, I heard my friend went there and it was bad. So.
It's not kosher.
Oh, no, well, so, but will that matter whether it's just a discussion or whether there's a leader trying to push? I mean, either way, you're going to end up with a lot of dissension, right? Pam and then Minya.
Unmute. There was a story on the news the other day that a psychologist was on the news, and he said, and as an example of this, a lot of the people who are unvaccinated are unvaccinated because they feel the government has been pushing too hard for them to get vaccinated, and just the concept that they're being pushed by the government, they're being unvaccinated.
Well, right, so if somebody calls me and wants to sell me a stock really enthusiastically, I'm gonna immediately be suspicious, right? Because why are they trying to sell me a stock so hard if it's such a good stock? And, but if I hear about the stock on the internet and then I call up my broker and I say, I want to buy this stock, and the broker says, are you sure? I'm not, then I'm more likely to buy it because I don't feel my broker is trying to quote unquote, sell me something. Maybe, okay. And that goes for synagogues. We've learned that the rabbi, me, I can't go out with people that I don't know and try to recruit them to the temple. They perceive it as I'm selling something. And why is the rabbi pushing so hard? It has to come from members. So member A says to their friend, we got a great temple. And then later they meet the rabbi and the rabbi seems enthusiastic. So you would think it wouldn't matter so much, but it does. So how you sell something is as frequently you can have a good product, and if you push it too hard, you can make people suspicious and make them very reluctant. Next, comments about leadership, about group dynamics, about, yes, Minya.
I was going to say something about your restaurant story. I would think that
which is completely fictitious.
I know, but I'm just saying, I think that it would take one person to finally say, let's find a restaurant that has a menu with a diverse menu. And that's where we're going to go. Everybody will find something. And then that person will email everybody a time and directions. So it takes one person to pull it together.
Okay, so there has to be, but you're not really describing a leader, you're describing more a consensus builder or a maybe a like an administrator, an organizer, facilitator, thank you. A little different than a leader. I see a leader as primarily about vision. So if I want to be a rabbinic leader, I want to create a dynamic congregation where 95% of my members are there 24 hours a day praying and studying. That's my vision.
But that's long term. We're talking about one night for dinner. You don't need a leader. You just need someone to pull it together.
Okay, right. You don't need leadership to make dinner reservations.
Exactly.
I think all you're talking about is a matter of scale here.
But it's not a matter of vision about wanting something great and noble and long-term and transformative.
Not for dinner.
Sometimes the leader just has to guide the group in the right direction without any manifestations of great visions or anything else. Get down in the trenches and dig.
Well, when I was a student rabbi, I was one summer for 4 months in Brisbane, Australia, and they had brought in a student rabbi once every 10 years. But it went so well that the rabbis in the rest of the country wanted to see if they could bring me back and convince there was another Temple Shalom about an hour away on the Gold Coast in Surfers Paradise, if they convince them to work together with the other Temple Shalom and hire me full-time permanently. So they brought me back as a second 4-month period. And the two temples refused to work with each other. It was not going to work. But it was an interesting exercise in trying to see how you can try to, and I knew it was going to fail when the second Temple Shalom in Surfers Paradise, who said they had no money to work collaboratively with this other temple and build something jointly, including hiring a rabbi. And then I heard that their temple was only about 10 years old. They had a massive plan to rebuild their kitchen. And so they had no problems raising all the money for the kitchen, but they couldn't raise money to jointly hire a rabbi. And so it's kind of like what Bernie says, so that sometimes a leader has to, go with the flow. And if there's the demand, then the leader just has to kind of fit into that demand. And you can't push people to do things they don't want to do, even if it's in their interests, potentially, because they have to see it as their interest. So a leader has to, I guess there's different models of leadership, but that kind of leader would just go with the flow. And some of the most successful rabbis of the 20th century were in the 50s and 60s, when these suburban communities were just growing. So unless the rabbi shot someone, he was considered Messiah. Every year, their congregation would grow by 200 families, and all he had to do was just show up. So, if the trends are with you and the goodwill is there and people want something, the leader can just go with the flow. Pam.
You should get you a t-shirt that says, if it wasn't for the new kitchen, I would be in Australia.
If it wasn't for the what?
If it wasn't for a new kitchen, I would be in Australia.
Yeah, well, with the kangaroos and the koalas. Reva.
Yeah, I think it's sort of, I like this parak because it really focuses on what one would be looking for in good leadership. I think not just in countries, but sometimes in smaller organizations, including Shoals once in a while, you get a what do they call a kleptocrat, whose true intention is to use his power or her power to steal or take advantage of the larger population. And so I think what they're looking at here is, what are the qualities we really want in good leadership? And I think that's an interesting question.
And what would be some of the qualities that you think might be important?
A concern about the greater good, a willingness to work hard, a willingness to listen, the ability to absorb a great deal of information, and to be ethically a fair person, to see that people are treated justly.
But the one you said, the ability to listen, that's very problematic, because who do you listen to? You normally get people telling you, 2 or 3 or 4 conflicting visions. So, listening is, you have to define what you mean by listening. Anybody want to talk a little more about how does a leader in a community, whether it be the ancient Israelites or modern synagogue or anywhere in between, how do they listen in a way that's useful? Lorraine?
Lorraine,
I am muted. A person who is a good leader gives everyone a chance to express their point of view and tries to listen objectively. Doesn't favor one person over another just because they may be friends with them or have business with them. And one really never knows who's going to be a good leader until they're in that position, because leadership changes people.
But when you say listen in an objective manner, but if one person's saying do X and the other person's saying do Y, and the rabbi, let's say in this case, decides Y is the better way to go, how does the leader show that he or she wasn't biased and favoring that Y position because they're friends with that person, but rather have decided that Y is just a better way to go? In other words, how do you show that you're not?
Yeah, it depends. If the membership is at the meeting, take a vote, see which way the membership would like to go. That's the way I would do it.
And so what if the leader doesn't agree with the majority and thinks the best way to go is not what the majority wants?
I say get a new leader.
Last 4 years.
Okay, so you think Yeah, so Lorraine, you're saying the leader should really do what the people want, the majority, that the leader's job is more of a facilitator or an organizer, not somebody who has to independently make.
Right.
I mean, you got to give Liz Cheney some credit. I mean, regardless of what you think of her politics before this, she's bucking almost the entire Republican establishment, because I would think she really believes in what, in what she's saying, which I think I understand why she believes that. But normally politicians will do what you say and go with the majority and keep their mouths shut. And she stood up very strongly, and she may, her political career may yet come to a complete end because of it. But, she felt, I don't care if the majority of my constituents, think that it was okay to storm the Capitol building. I think it was a threat to democracy, and I'm going to say that. So she doesn't agree with you, Lorraine. And I guess you and her probably don't agree on a lot of stuff too.
I'm sure.
But okay, Minya or Bernie, any other comments on leadership side?
Well, I think the basic concept of leadership is to unify different ideas and opinions. That's the main job of any kind of a leader.
So not to necessarily formulate their own position, but to kind of bring together what the group wants.
Absolutely.
Okay. Who'd like to read? Reva, do you want to keep going?
Yeah, I'll do a little bit more and then I'll pass it on. We're at interpreters towards the bottom of the
Yes.
left-hand side.
172 towards the bottom left-hand side.
Paragraph starts with interpreters.
Yeah.
Interpreters ask several questions about the Torah's description of the passing of leadership by Moses to Joshua. Why doesn't Moses choose one of his sons to succeed him? What is special about Joshua? Why does Moses publicly confer his leadership power upon Joshua? Some of the first rabbinic commentators seek to explain why Moses' sons Gershon and Eleazar did not inherit the leadership from their father. Because the Torah does not contain any direct information about the decision, rabbinic interpreters use their imagination. They portray Moses as a concerned father, worried about the rights of inheritance of his sons. Arguing with God, Moses says, "Whoever keeps the fig tree should have the right to eat its fruit. Let them succeed me." But Moses is told, say the rabbis, that Gershon and Eleazar are not worthy of leadership. They idle away each day. They do not study Torah or put it into a practice. Joshua does. Furthermore, Joshua honors you. He cleans and arranges the room where students gather to learn from you, and he has protected you from harm. For those reasons, he is more worthy to succeed you than your own sons.
Okay, so this is a rabbinic recreation of the scene 2,000 years afterwards, right? So this is not what actually happened. This is just how the rabbis imagine it. But it seems to reflect a rabbinic view of how do you pick a leader. And it shouldn't be based on nepotism. So that should be pretty obvious. And now in America, we've had the political dynasties where the sons take over from the father, but they have to run for elections. And there's only so far that it goes, right? So you could see with the Kennedys that, there's no Kennedy who's really that far up in the political hierarchy anymore. And it's not because there's not young Kennedys that don't want to be in politics, but, passing on that cachet is not always that easy. And, Trump is trying to do that as well with his son and daughter-in-law, and we'll see, how well they do. But, it's not an automatic process, right? You've got the younger generation still have to get elected, and, the name can sometimes be helpful and sometimes not. On the other hand, Joshua, what positive traits does he have?
He's a good house cleaner.
Yes, so.
Well,
I
he's
don't-
always learning. He's studying.
All right. He's studying. They don't say how much he studies. You know, but somebody who cleans and arranges the place, he doesn't sound like an alpha male, really, does he? He sounds like somebody who's pretty content to follow around Moses and kind of help out Moses. It's not what I would envision for a leader. I want somebody who might come in and punch Moses in the nose and take over, somebody who's dominant, not somebody who's going to clean up after him. Bernie and then Marcia.
Well, I think that one of the main reasons he was chosen was that he was a good military leader. And that's what was envisioned to be needed once they crossed into hostile territory.
Correct. And that's not mentioned in this rabbinic account, correct? Because the rabbis who lived right after the three catastrophic rebellions against Rome were not going to say anything to encourage any sort of rebellion, or any military, anything like that was strictly forbidden because of the experiences of the 1st and 2nd century CE. So the rabbis are very much a product of their time. Marcia and then Riva.
And yet, when he went into Canaan and came back with the, bearing grapes and fruits, and his people were frightened. He said he was afraid that these people were giants and we were as ants or whatever he said we were, grasshoppers. And so he did have, he wasn't necessarily superhero military guy, he was so intimidated by the Canaanites, so it's a little bit of there's contrary things going on discussing him. That's all I got to say. But he did fight the Battle of Jericho eventually.
But the archaeologists found out that the biblical account is not true.
Really?
But you can talk to Simon for more information about that. Ray. I'm sorry, Riva and then Ray.
Yeah, in the upper paragraph on 172 on the right-hand side, it says Joshua protected you from harm. And I think one of the things we look for in a good leadership is a leader who will look for what's best in protecting his population.
Wait, is he saying protected the Israelites or protected Moses?
She's reading the "you as Israelite."
Let me see.
Both.
Okay, I'm not sure.
I
Moses
read
is
that
told,
as
say the
protecting
rabbis.
you, Moses.
Moses is told, say the rabbis. So I don't know if they're referring to God or what in this context.
Okay, interesting. But clearly from other contexts, we can gather that Joshua would be a good one to protect the Israelites if indeed they're going to have to fight battles to establish themselves in the land of Canaan. Babette, comment?
Not at the moment.
Okay, Ray?
Just 2 paragraphs ahead, Joshua, on the other hand, is worthy of inheriting the leadership from Moses. Rabbinic commentators note not only his inquiring mind devoted to learning, but his willingness to work hard and serve as an apprentice to Moses, honoring and protecting him. Joshua is chosen because of his demonstrated commitment to Moses and his loyalty to the Israelites. There you have a trained man. And Rashi, agreeing with this assessment, Rashi adds another reason for the choice of Joshua as his successor to Moses. Rashi points out that Joshua's competition was neither Gershon nor Eleazar, but Pinchas, Aaron's son. Pinchas had demonstrated loyalty to both Moses and God when he rushed forward to murder an Israelite who had, in violation of the law of Torah, taken a Midianite woman into his tent for sexual pleasure. Pinchas's action, however, revealed his propensity for quick, careless, and violent action. Instead of consulting with Moses, Pinchas took matters into his own hands, acting rashly and self-righteously. Rashi reasons that Moses' successor could not be impulsive or tend to act in anger. The Israelites required a person who would understand their diverse nature and regard each individual with patience. Leadership demanded tolerance and a temperament of careful and cautious judgment. Pinchas was not such a person. He acted before he questioned. He was a single-minded zealot and therefore unworthy of leadership. Joshua, on the other hand, is seen by Rashi as judicious, careful, slow to act, and sensitive to differences of opinion. While forming his own conclusions, Joshua is a person who listens and learns from others. Rashi implies that only a person with such characteristics deserves to succeed Moses and lead the people into the promised land.
Okay. So why would Pinchas be a logical person to take over? What is his
Son of Aaron.
Because he's the son of Aaron. Okay, so, and remember, two of Aaron's sons were executed by God. So there's not a good record there. Also, Aaron himself was implicated in the golden calf. So, and now Aaron and Moses are the two leaders, right? And Aaron had a pretty high profile. Now you could compare them in some ways with Fidel Castro and Raul Castro in Cuba. Fidel Castro was the guy out front, the leader. Raul Castro was very close behind him, giving him advice and doing a lot of the technical stuff. And Moses, and Fidel Castro could be seen as similar, and Raul Castro and Aaron could be seen as similar. And what's interesting in Cuba is that for whatever reasons, maybe because Fidel died first, the people running the country today are mostly either the family of Raul or Raul's disciples. So Cuba's not Fidel Castro's country anymore, it's his brother's country. And part of that is that Fidel's son was irresponsible. And you sort of see the same thing here, except Moses's sons were seen as rather irresponsible, but Aaron's son was also not really suitable. I mean, the idea that this whole thing about killing that Israelite for going into the tent with a Midianite woman, strikes me as rather horrific, and that they would, that Rashi would even consider that, says a lot about how mentalities have changed. But the rashness, the impetuousness, this represents all the bad character traits that I would think we'd want to avoid. And that, by the way, Moses had a little bit of that as well. The whole incident of striking the rock, I previously I'd said, well, what's the big deal? So he banged a stick on the rock. but you could see maybe this shows why Moses's act wasn't so not serious after all. Whether you're striking a rock, or putting a spear through a person, the character trait of just not being deliberate, not being thoughtful, not being, slow to anger. It's the same sort of a problem. Marcia.
That box there that says Pele, I think is interesting, that just passed where Ray had read.
Okay,
Because
you
it
want to
goes-
read that?
It goes into what goes,
All right, let's read that. Marcia, you want to read that?
I'll try. I've got this allergy thing going. Fair and firm. As the future leader, Joshua is described as a man in whom there is spirit. Here Rashi comments, a man who knows how to stand up against the spirit of each one of them and who knows how to teach us that to be tolerant does not necessarily imply passivity or spinelessness. A good leader must know his own mind. He must be able to stand up for his views, and he must be capable of changing his mind, of freeing himself from preconceived ideas. He must not be the type who declares, my mind is made up, don't confuse me with facts. Leaders who truly lead their people will raise them to their own level. They have a chance to lead them out of corruption and to bring them into holiness. Leaders who trail behind their people will finally be dragged down by them to their own low level.
All right, I agree with the second part of that. I'm not so sure. Leaders who let the lowest common denominator of their group dominate will end up going nuts, because they'll end up being held responsible for all the worst things that are happening. So, but the first part is certainly, very difficult. You have to raise up the people. You have to lead them out of corruption. How do you do that? That's not so easy, but you don't really have a choice but to try, because if you just go along with what the riffraff want, the end is going to be bad, and they're going to blame you because you were the technical leader. And you can't turn around and then say, but I was only doing what they wanted, because what they wanted was clearly bad. Pam.
We don't read the book of Joshua, so I'm curious. Did Joshua end up being a good leader?
Well, that's a very hard question to answer. That's a really hard question. And now we don't read the book of Joshua. That's an interesting comment. It's in the Jewish Bible for sure. It's the 6th book. At one point, the rabbis apparently considered making that 6th book, the book of Joshua, part of the Torah itself, but they didn't. And if it had, then it would have been included in the weekly readings. I wouldn't suggest studying it in like adult education course, because it's fairly technical and it's fairly straightforward. It's not very philosophical or anything like that. But then to bring science to the conversation, it's totally not clear how much of it actually is true. It appears that most of it was written after the fact and reflects what the Israelites later thought had happened or should have happened, rather than what actually happened. So to evaluate Joshua as a leader is very difficult, but nothing catastrophic happened. The Israelites did enter into the land, or if they were already in the land, they established themselves. So I guess you could say he did good, I guess. But yet his reputation is still rather thin, and you can see most of what we've studied here is from rabbinic writings, right? Which is writing a long time after. So the book of Joshua doesn't really tell us that much about specific incidents and stuff that you can really judge what he was like. Bonnie or Lorraine or Riva? You okay, Bonnie? You're okay, Riva?
Yeah,
Yes.
I think one of the interesting points is, does the leader lead from the rear, or does he lead from he or she lead from the front? And that's brought out in some of the following paragraphs. And I think that question of, do you lead purely by consensus, or do you synthesize everything that's been brought to you after listening carefully and then make the best possible decision to address your community, is sort of an important distinction. That is between leading from the rear and leading from the front. And it literally describes that in some of the later paragraphs.
And which is better,
Leading from the front,
but which is easier?
leading from the rear.
And so how do you lead from the front successfully?
I think it's what it describes, that you synthesize the information that you've taken care of, and you think through it carefully, and then you make the best possible decision based on careful judgment and good ethics.
Okay, Marcia?
I was just gonna say, you plan. You plan ahead, you see what the situation is, you try to assess what your actions are going to have upon the situation. And you can't just say, just marching off into the sunset. You have to know what you're looking to do and what you're looking to achieve. And so I think planning is a big thing in there. For a leader, you can't just willy-nilly run off and act.
Sai, and then Minya or Babette.
What I don't understand is that in as much as God has already appointed Joshua, he's told Moses that Joshua is the right leader. Why all the conversation afterwards? It was an established fact in the writings of the first people in terms of God appointing Joshua. So why would further authors get involved as to why Moses made the choice when the choice was never Moses?
I guess the rabbinic interpreters choose certain things that they fixate on as questions. And I'm not sure it's always clear why they ask certain questions and not others. But for whatever reason, one of the ones they ask is, why did Moses, or how did Joshua get picked? And clearly this is an ongoing issue, because in the Middle Ages, rabbis wanted to promote their own sons as their successors. So there was a certain, and in a lot of things, kings, for example, medieval kings, you had to give the crown to your son, right? Or to your daughter in certain cases, right? So, and so the idea of hereditary leadership, it was logical to the medieval people, but yet it doesn't happen. Joshua's not related to Moses or Aaron. Joshua ben Nun, his father was a guy named Nun, who ran a convenience store. Just joking. But so that they're trying to figure out, well, can we still consider to give our sons our jobs after we pass away, or before we pass away, or what does this mean for us, and what does it mean for Jewish leadership in general? Other comments? Minya, Babette, Shirley, Ray.
Well, we lead by example also sometimes, and Moses' sons didn't provide a good example. Joshua, he walked the walk.
So what if Moses had a son who was doing okay? Would they have picked him? I mean, in other words, is this a rejection of familial leadership, or is it just saying because Moses' sons weren't appropriate, we have to look outside of the immediate family?
Well, you have to be selfless if the greater good is what's at stake, not the family name. If you really care for the people and going forward and the way things go, that ability and for people to recognize that and follow that. And Joshua did prove himself to be a good example.
Okay, any other responses? Bernie, Minya, Riva, Steve, Bernie.
Yeah, there's something to be said for familial descent or passing the baton to your children, because one hopes that they have inherited some of the characteristics that made you a good leader. And it's unfortunate that it didn't happen in this case, or in these cases, as we're discussing.
Well, Moses was probably too busy working to really spend any significant time with his sons.
You should have done a take me along, on the job.
Well,
You lead by example too,
I have an interesting anecdote in my family. I had two uncles that had successful furniture stores. And when they both retired and passed the baton to their children, they showed up in the store every day until they couldn't anymore. And so they really didn't pass the baton.
and how did that work out?
More or less okay. I don't know whether they collaborated. I know in one case, the father was much stronger than in the other case. And he basically quarterbacked, or Monday morning quarterbacked everything.
And so after the two uncles died, which son did better? The one that had the dominant father or the one that had a less dominant father?
I would say that equal. In one case, they kind of moved the business in a different direction. The grandsons moved the business in another direction, not the sons.
Okay. I was hoping you would give me a very definitive answer, like the dominant father's son wrecked the business, and the father that was less dominant, his son went on to run the biggest furniture store in the entire Southwest, but it doesn't always work out with such a clear lesson at the end.
Interestingly, the dominant one's grandson, they had to fire him.
Wow.
Because he was like Moses's sons.
Cy, and then who else had their hands up? Ray. Cy, and then Ray.
Maybe I'm assuming incorrectly, but I'm thinking that when Moses dies, he leaves a nice inheritance, and so the two kids really don't want to go to work. They have a pretty good life, and they don't want to assume the responsibility that goes with the job. So, that has to be a consideration as well.
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting thing. So, yeah, but there's some sons or daughters of people who are quote unquote rich, and they're very motivated to achieve things on their own, right? It's not about having enough money to buy a nice condo. It's about wanting to have a productive career and to make a name for yourself. And then there's other people who, say, I'm from a very affluent family. I just wanna drink beer and watch TV and buy stuff. So it's not always clear how your children are going to respond to affluence. And then of course you have that kid in Texas that killed a bunch of people in the car, and he claimed the defense of affluenza. That he was from such a spoiled up, background that he couldn't tell the difference between right and wrong, which was just insane, but he more or less got away with his crimes. Ray, did you want to say something?
Yes, realistically, things keep changing from one generation to another. How very different life is today than it was when I was a child in the 20s. And how even as a mother in the 40s and the 50s, etc. I think that people have to learn morals, which our Bible stresses, and learn to develop what was best in them, whether it be art, music, an ability to work in biology, or everyone has a different talent that has been made, not just from two people, but two people plus two more who were the grandparents, plus two more who were the great-grandparents. So everybody is different. And luckily in America, many of our young people have the advantage of getting as much education in the thing that seems most basic to them. So realistically, it's a matter of self-character and how we live in the community we live in. Is so much, what I'm trying to stress is that you can read all of this and these marvelous characteristics of leadership. These are all necessary, but usually we don't know what we can do until we're challenged. And then if we have the character, we can meet the challenge. And that's what life is about now.
Pam or Babette? Riva.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things, in addition to the transfer of power and making good choices in leadership, towards the end, this discusses that giving up leadership, letting it go, and facing retirement and facing death. And I think those are interesting topics to hear, from our ancestors, how they viewed those things. And I think I appreciate the sensitivity of dealing with them at all in our Torah commentary, and how tough those transitions are.
And one of the transitions is from working to being retired. And most of us are retired, myself excluded.
Un momento.
What?
I've got somebody behind me. I'm just telling her to wait a moment. I'm sorry.
Okay. And so towards the end of the commentary, skipping onto page 174, Harvey Fields talks a little bit about how retirement is hard and cites Moses' experience with Joshua. Can anyone retell that story? If you've read, if you read the whole thing. Well, on page 174, middle of the page there, you see the rabbis capture Moses' feelings in those transition moments between retirement and death. They call attention to the deal Moses seeks to make with God. Please let me live, the rabbis imagine him saying. Let Joshua take over my office, but allow me to live by his side. God grants Moses' wish, and the next day goes with Joshua to the sanctuary. They enter, and a pillar of cloud separates them. When it departs, Moses asks Joshua, "What did God tell you?" Joshua, looking at the aged leader, responds, when God spoke to you, did you tell me what was said? Stunned, Moses has realized that authority has shifted to Joshua. The transition is complete, and Moses is deeply jealous. Better to die than to experience such envy, he mutters to God. Now Moses is ready for death. It almost sounds like Moses just can't adjust retirement. If he had known about Sun City, he could have gotten a little house and learned to golf. Maybe he could have won that new car in the golf tournament. He could go swimming every day. He could go out to lunch with his friends. Moses sounds like a complete workaholic, somebody who just could not adjust to retirement. Marcia.
Hey, when you've been able to talk to God and then you're cut off all at once, that's got to be on the tough side, you know? It's tougher than just an ordinary boss, you know?
Well,
And
but if you were vice president of some big corporation and now you're nobody,
it's not God.
all right.
But I
Yeah.
think Joshua could have been a little more diplomatic about this whole thing.
Well, I think Joshua had to set boundaries, right?
That's true.
If he humored Moses, it was going to go on and on. He had to tell Moses, you know, this is it. You've retired. You're not the leader anymore. I disagree with you, Marcia. I think it was better for him to be very straightforward about it, not to humor him. Pam.
Yeah, I agree. I think Joshua said it perfectly, because if he had been diplomatic, Moses would not have gotten the message. Joshua needed to slam that door. So.
I mean, he wasn't rude, but he told them
Right.
the truth, that you're
Right.
not the leader anymore, and I'm the one that has to
Right.
deal with God, not
Right.
Bernie.
Remember, this isn't a real conversation. This is something that the rabbis writing the Talmud just imagined.
Right. But it's like it's real, Bernie. It's just like it's real. Right, Si? Riva?
Yeah, for me, it seems very real. I mean, you know, it doesn't have to be literally true, but I think it has a deeper truth than the literal truth. And that is, these kinds of transitions are very difficult for a lot of people.
Yeah, and just to Babette, yes.
Well, bringing it up to examples of the present, we bring ourselves with us, you know, and if there are people who were totally devoted to their jobs and can't give up working, you know, then perhaps retirement is very difficult because they had no outside interests other than their jobs. They didn't play golf or poker or pickleball, you know, they just know how to work.
Right.
And that makes retirement very, very difficult for some who were not busy. They were only busy with their work. They were not busy before, so they take themselves with them.
Right. Well, my father was a dentist for many years, and when he retired at age 71 or so, and he lived to about 85, he really tried to get into the hobbies. He made lists of hobbies, and he would proudly report he went to the senior center and did this, and he went here, but it was like, it was something he struggled. You know, it wasn't like, oh, I had so much fun, I just did what I'd always wanted to do. It was more like, I'm trying to keep busy, you know.
Well, some of us start playing big time in retirement.
Yeah, well, Babette, you're good at this. You know how to have a good time. But it was much harder for my father. Marcia.
My father didn't want to go to the senior center. There's only old people there, you know, so he had a tough.
Right. Well, Right, well,
Well, he went down to the courthouse and would listen to the trials go on because he had an interest in that. It's very hard to, I remember my husband was going to retire. He never, he died before he did. But he was making plans and he was thinking of all the things he would like to do. And I think that's something that you have to kind of consider that, you know?
I just have one comment.
Riva,
Yeah, my father was a musician and he played until virtually the day he died. And he just loved making music. And the message we got in our family a lot was do work you love doing and you never have to work. And, you know, I see that. I look around this screen and I see lots of people who do activities for the temple. And I think a lot of us do it because we love doing it. And also because of the opportunities to be with people that we enjoy being with. And so we select tasks that we do as volunteers or, you know, no longer paid people because we love doing them. We love the interaction, we love the activity.
final comments, Cy and then Pam.
I'm directing this to you, Rabbi. What's your thought about this whole thing in terms of the author spending so much time on it from a psychological point of view, when the next big step in the history of Israel is a big war that's coming up?
Yeah.
And there's no mention of that to Joshua. I mean, that's a bigger problem than the immediate problem. What's your thought about that?
We're filtering this through rabbinic literature. Rabbinic literature avoids any mention of the wars or anything because the rabbis of Talmud had been through the 3 rebellions. The medieval rabbis lived under mostly Christian control. So both groups were very skittish about mentioning anything about war. So we're seeing an image of Joshua and Moses that's completely not realistic, but rather reflects a very different time period. So that's a good point. Yeah. So, and you could see that in the case of Joshua, they're saying how he studied all the time and stuff, and that's ridiculous. You know, he was, you know, if it was really Joshua in the Exodus, he was somebody who wandered around the desert for 40 years. He was not a big student. He was a desert nomad who was good at catching camels and evading scorpions and planning how to know which way to go in the sand. Pam.
I think I'm going to pass. We're running out of time. Thanks anyway.
It's okay. No, okay. I want to conclude also just on a personal note with the leadership expressing my deep sadness at the passing of Rabbi Arthur Abrams this week. You know, I never knew Arthur before I came to this congregation, and you know, before coronavirus, I was rabbi only for about 8 months, and he was around. So I met him a number of times. And the first High Holy Days, we were, you know, he came and he, you know, co-officiated a little bit. But I really, really, really liked him, you know, and I deeply regret I didn't get to know him better. And, you know, I'm very honored to be serving in the pulpit that he served in prior to me. And so there's something about coming in the footsteps of somebody that you respect that is very gratifying. Okay, Steve, we're over to you. Time to stop.
We're okay. Quick question. Do you know when the funeral is going to be, or
I was gonna say.
about the arrangements?
With Beverly Cohen, the funeral's Friday at noon, I believe, in Sunland.
Okay.
Rabbi Abrams and his wife Claire had moved back to California about a year ago.
Oh, I didn't know.
At the beginning of COVID. Well, they had a condo in Southern California, so they went back and forth. And then at some point, really because of Claire, they were planning to spend most of their time there. And then as COVID kept going, Arthur told me that they were probably just going to stay there and that was it. I don't believe they ever sold their house here. They were, Arthur was planning to. And apparently, it was very quick. I did speak to his daughter, Rachel Abrams, yesterday. He had some leg pain or something, but nothing that seemed serious at all. And then eventually, he got diagnosed, and a very, very short time later, all his organs stopped functioning. So, between diagnosis and death was days.
What did he die of?
I think it's lymphoma,
Oh,
but
Really?
I think he had cancer, blood cancer, is it? And it was very sudden. Oh,
And she's not in good shape.
yeah, so Claire's been a little bit sick herself, and Arthur was taking care of her. And his devotion to her was really, really immense. So, I wish I knew more about his rabbinic career in our congregation. But he was just such a nice guy and just so encouraging, and we just had a nice relationship that I'll deeply, deeply miss, and I respected him very much. Okay, Steve, back to you.
All right, let us conclude with the blessing. Baruch atah
Adonai,
Eloheinu
Eloheinu
melech
melech
haolam, asher
Hashem
natan
Adonai Barak Emet,
Chaye
Chaye
olam
Olam Natan Eloheinu Baruch atah Adonai,
V'tein haTorah. Blessed is Adonai our God, ruler of the universe, who has given us teaching the truth, planting within us eternal life. Blessed is Adonai, giver of the Torah. Amen.
Amen.
Have a great week, everyone, and see you soon.
Stephen
Yes.
Riva, we want to plan further on because we only have one more session listed on the outline. Can we talk now just briefly?
Sure,
Yeah.
sure.
and Steve, let me know when you want to start doing plans for the
Oh, the the Kavod Award.
codes, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
All
okay.
right. Bye-bye.
All
So long, everybody.
Are we meeting next week?
Steve,
We're scheduled
Next
to.
week, yes. It's Wednesday, the day,
But
Golden
it's Erev Yom Kippur.
Wait.
Rabbi,
your decision.
I have no objection.
I think it needs to be a rabbi's decision because it's a
Yeah,
tough day
because
for
are
him.
you gonna be wiped out from it or whatever?
Can we send out an announcement, Riva and Steve, about that in the next day or so?
Yeah,
Sure.
let's do that. We'll meet the three of us now and then make a decision about how to
Okay.
handle it.
Okay,
Very good.
Okay.
bye-bye all.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Stay well, everybody.
Yep.
I think we can shut off the recording. I think I can shut it off
good
from
idea.
here.
Stop.
I think Lorraine's fallen asleep.